frank and honest and transparent. We're not worried. All the power is in our hands. We have never had a moment like this where there's been so much momentum, where there's been so much investment, demand of our sports. And I'm just kind of like upset, frustrated, all of us. And in a lot of ways, just like disgusted with the W and how they're handling this and their lack of value, their lack of worth for us, their lack of even trying to attempt to move the needle with us. Like, we know what is on the horizon. We know in 2 years our TV deal is up and there's a new TV deal that's going to come that they're not even putting on the table for us. The percentages, if we actually told you the percentages of what they're giving, that they're like sending to us.
History was made at Unrivaled last night and we missed it. Shame on you, and most importantly, shame on you. Unrivaled broke attendance records and we missed it. You'd think that fans of Unrivaled would be boasting about their attendance record, right? Gleefully cheering about how amazing the game was. But the sickos out there, they had to bring up Caitlin Clark because that's all they can do. We're gonna get into that momentarily, but before we do, Natasha Cloud offering a stern warning to WNBA owners across the league. In fact, owners were trembling in their shoes.
That's Natasha Cloud staring directly into a camera, dropping what she calls a stern warning to WNBA owners. But here's what she's not saying. While Cloud claims players hold all the power, there's a meeting scheduled for Monday in New York City that could determine whether the WNBA's 30th season starts on time. And the leverage she's talking about, it might be the most dangerous bluff in professional sports right now, because the numbers tell a completely different story than the confidence. 28 consecutive years of financial losses, not break-even seasons, not modest deficits, 28 years of red ink, subsidized entirely by NBA revenue. And now, with momentum finally building, with visibility finally increasing, players are making demands that could collapse the entire foundation. Let's be clear about what's actually happening here. This isn't about whether players deserve fair compensation. It's about whether the business can sustain what's being demanded. And if you've been following the disconnect between what players are saying publicly and what the financial reality actually shows, you already know something doesn't add up. If you believe the story behind the story matters, if you think understanding the actual business dynamics is more valuable than the performance, hit that like button. It tells us you're here for the real analysis, not just the headlines. So what's really at stake on Monday? The Players Association is meeting with WNBA leadership in New York. High-stakes negotiations. Season 30 hangs in the balance. Players like Napheesa Collier will be there. Some owners will attend. And the outcome of this single meeting could determine whether the momentum that's been building, the visibility that Caitlin Clark's impact created, all of it could evaporate if this goes wrong. Here's what makes this moment so critical. The casual fans who started watching because women's basketball suddenly felt culturally relevant. They're not going to wait out a work stoppage. The hardcore supporters will stick around, but that growth audience, the people who pushed television ratings from 0 games over 1 million viewers to multiple games hitting those numbers, they'll disappear instantly. And getting them back will be nearly impossible. Natasha Cloud says the worst business decision any business can make is not paying the workers who make the business go. But let's examine that claim, because it reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what's actually happening. The worst business decision is continuing to operate a business that loses money indefinitely with no path to profitability. And right now, the WNBA's path to profitability requires cost control. It requires realistic revenue-sharing percentages. It requires player salaries that align with what the league actually generates, not what players believe they deserve based on NBA comparisons. The current offer on the table would give players nearly 15% of revenue. Salaries over $1 million for stars. Average salaries around $500,000. And Cloud is calling that disrespectful. Let's put that in perspective. The NBA gives players 50% of basketball-related income, but the NBA generates billions in profit. The WNBA has never turned a profit in 28 years. Giving WNBA players even 15% of revenue is historically generous when the league itself is operating at a loss. What Cloud isn't mentioning in her camera stare-down with executives is that owners have alternatives. They've been losing money for decades. Walking away would actually improve their balance sheets. The NBA could redirect WNBA subsidy funds into other investments. Arena deals wouldn't collapse because WNBA teams are typically secondary tenants. That's not strength, that's desperation, masked as confidence. Meanwhile, what are the players' alternatives if the WNBA doesn't meet their demands? Unrivaled pays well for a 3-month season, but it's not a full-time replacement for WNBA salary. Overseas leagues exist, but they don't provide the visibility or platform that the WNBA offers. Starting a competing league would require massive capital investment with no guarantee of success. And this brings us to what happened in Philadelphia last night, because it's directly connected to these CBA negotiations. Unrivaled drew 21,490 fans to their game, a record for regular season professional women's basketball, and immediately the narrative war began. The anti-Caitlin Clark crowd rushed to social media with one message. See, women's basketball doesn't need her. This proves the league can draw without her. Maybe we should stop giving her credit and just pay the players.
One either. So maybe we stop giving her credit for women's basketball and pay the players. On the contrary, everywhere women's basketball is, Caitlin Clark's there. Everywhere women's basketball explodes, Caitlin Clark's fingerprints are all over it. Everywhere women's basketball attendance records are being broken, Caitlin Clark, yeah, you guessed it, is the reason for that. Whether she's in the building, fans aren't the one that broke the women's sports attendance. And you know the CC, they're not letting that slide. Not letting that slide. Oh, you mean this 55,000 right here with CC, and it was one game, not 2 games? Nice try though. Oh yeah, that's right. The exhibition. And a football stadium, 55,000. See, it's stuff like this. Random person makes false statement, CCFC corrects random person, oh my gosh. That fan base is so racist.
Except there's a problem with that argument. Actually, several problems, and they all fall apart under the slightest scrutiny. The claim is that this attendance record proves women's basketball can succeed without Caitlin Clark's involvement. But that ignores 15 years of documented history. From 2009 through 2023, the WNBA didn't have a single game reach 1 million television viewers. Not one. Crowds of 7,000 were celebrated. 8,000 fans had the league doing backflips. The attendance records being broken now, the television numbers exploding, the media deals being negotiated, none of that existed before Caitlin Clark's rise. Her 55,000 attendance at Iowa wasn't just a one-time event. It was a signal that something fundamental had shifted in women's basketball. And that shift created the environment where Unrivaled could even attempt a 21,000-seat venue and believe they could fill it. The infrastructure, the interest, the cultural moment that made Philadelphia's attendance possible. Caitlin Clark built that foundation. But let's dig deeper into what actually happened in Philadelphia, because the attendance number alone doesn't tell the complete story. Ticket prices, that's the detail that matters. Reports indicate some fans got in for $26 per ticket, $52 for 2 people. Compare that to WNBA playoff pricing, where Caitlin Clark's games were commanding premium prices and still selling out instantly. Volume versus value. Unrivaled packed the building, but they did it by making tickets accessible to the point of being almost promotional, which is fine as a business strategy for a startup league trying to build buzz. But it's not the same as sustained demand at premium pricing. And here's the television component that got buried in all the celebration. If 21,000 people were in the arena, how many were watching at home? Because Unrivaled's typical television audience is around 20,000 viewers, which means the people who showed up in person were likely the same people who would have watched on TV.
Slopes. You guys see the W360 shirt? where it's like the rainbow wig and then the septum ring. Yeah, it was a lot of those. A lot of those in there. It doesn't stop. Oh, there's Caitlyn in a football stadium. Caitlyn still holds the record, plus the overall attendance average. Stop with the BS. It was a good night for Unrivaled. Again, they just can't celebrate their good night. They always got to drag Cece into that just for reality to come in and smack them across the face. Oops, looked like they did. Oh, there's Mick Talk Soup. Shout out to Mick. Ticket prices, big difference. Yeah, I heard that a couple got in there for $52. That's what I heard. $52 for 2 tickets. Crazy work. A reporter, sorry, don't know who, asked Natasha Cloud if she was worried about the lack of a CBA once February 1st rolled around. Tasha answered as only she could. Raw, honest, direct, no punches pulled. Before we get into that, on the attendance, if there were 21,000 people watching in the arena, how many people were watching at home? the 20,000 people that usually watch were in the arena. Interesting. Let's hear what this Natasha Cloud had to say.
The social media response revealed something fascinating about the current state of women's basketball discourse. Fans immediately started posting comparisons, fact checks, reality checks. One user pointed out the Iowa football stadium game, 55,000 fans for a single college exhibition, not a professional league with established stars, not a playoff game with championship implications, a regular exhibition game featuring Caitlin Clark. Another user highlighted that Caitlin Clark still holds the overall attendance average records in women's basketball. The Philadelphia crowd was impressive, but it was one event with heavily discounted pricing. Clark's impact has been sustained, measurable, and economically significant. And this is where the Philadelphia attendance connects directly back to Monday's CBA meeting. Because players are using moments like this, one good attendance number with discounted tickets, as evidence that they have leverage in negotiations, that they can make demands, that owners need them more than they need the WNBA. But if you've been paying attention to the pattern, if you've noticed how every conversation eventually circles back to proving women's basketball doesn't need Caitlin Clark, drop a comment. Tell us what you're seeing in these dynamics, because the narrative control happening right now is going to determine what happens on Monday. Let's examine what Natasha Cloud actually said in her warning to owners. She claims players aren't worried, that all the power is in their hands, that there's never been a moment with this much momentum, this much investment demand in the sport. And then she pivots to disgust. She's upset, frustrated, disgusted with the WNBA and how they're handling negotiations. Here's what's interesting about that framing. She's simultaneously claiming strength and expressing desperation. If players truly held all the power, if the leverage was genuinely on their side, there wouldn't be this level of emotional frustration leaking through. Confident negotiators don't need to stare into cameras and drop F-bombs at executives. They simply negotiate from their position of strength. Cloud mentions that the TV deal is up in 2 years, that there's a new deal coming that the league isn't putting on the table for players. The percentages they're being offered, she suggests, are insulting. But here's what that reveals. The current TV deal that includes WNBA content exists because of NBA leverage. Amazon, Disney, NBC, they wanted NBA rights. The WNBA got bundled into those negotiations as part of the package. That's not independent value, that's derivative value. And when Cloud talks about the percentages being disrespectful, she's comparing WNBA revenue sharing to NBA standards without acknowledging the fundamental difference. The NBA generates the revenue that makes these deals possible. The WNBA is being carried along in those negotiations. The fan response to Cloud's comments was swift and brutal. Suggestions that she should stay at Unrivaled, accusations of delusion, questions about whether she understands basic business principles. But there was also frustration from WNBA supporters who recognized that these public statements hurt the Players Association's negotiating position. Every time a player goes to the media with disrespectful comments about league ownership, it damages the relationship and hardens positions on both sides. The Players Association should be controlling the message, having strategic spokespeople, presenting a unified front. Instead, they're letting every player with a microphone speak for the collective, and it's creating a public relations disaster. And then there's the political theater. Natasha Cloud holding up an "Abolish ICE" sign while being introduced in Philadelphia, greeted by loud cheers from the crowd. The sign was barely readable on camera. Most viewers couldn't even make out what it said. But Cloud wanted that moment, wanted to be seen as someone using her platform for activism, which is her right. Athletes can advocate for whatever causes they believe in. But it's worth noting the pattern. Cloud seems more invested in being perceived as important than in actually being effective. The CBA comments, the political gestures, it's all performance. And while she's performing, the actual business of negotiating a sustainable collective bargaining agreement is getting more complicated. Because here's what makes this entire situation critical. Monday's meeting isn't just another negotiating session. It's the moment where both sides reveal whether they understand the actual stakes. After 28 years of losses, after finally getting media attention because of Caitlin Clark's impact, after seeing what visibility can do for the sport, the league has a decision to make. Do they cave to player demands that don't align with financial reality? Or do they hold firm and risk a work stoppage that could destroy the momentum that's been building? Because here's the thing about momentum in sports. It's fragile. The casual fans who started watching because of the exciting rookies, because women's basketball suddenly felt culturally relevant, those fans will disappear instantly if there's a lockout or strike. The hardcore fans will wait it out. But the growth audience, the people who pushed ratings from 0 to multiple million viewer games, they'll move on. And getting them back will be nearly impossible. That's the reality players need to understand walking into Monday's meeting. Natasha Cloud says players hold all the power. But power in negotiations comes from leverage, and leverage comes from alternatives. We've already examined what those alternatives look like for both sides. Owners can walk away and improve their financial situation. Players have limited options outside the WNBA that provide comparable visibility and platform. That asymmetry matters. The WNBA doesn't need Natasha Cloud. The league survived and grew without her being a central figure. But Natasha Cloud absolutely needs the WNBA, needs the platform, the visibility, the stage to make her political statements and feel important. And if players don't recognize that asymmetry before Monday's meeting, they're going to learn an expensive lesson about who actually holds the power. The meeting will reveal whether the Players Association understands financial reality, whether they're willing to accept a deal that's historically generous by WNBA standards, even if it doesn't match their aspirations, whether they recognize that the momentum they're celebrating is built on a foundation that Caitlin Clark created, and that foundation is still fragile, or whether they'll push for demands that force owners to make a choice, accept unsustainable terms, or walk away from an investment that's been nothing but red ink for 28 years. Natasha Cloud can stare into cameras all she wants, but on Monday, in that New York City meeting room, the business realities will matter more than the bravado. The spreadsheets will matter more than the social media posts. The actual leverage will matter more than the perceived power. And if the Players Association misreads this moment, if they overplay their hand based on one attendance number in Philadelphia and some improved television ratings that still don't generate profit, they could destroy the very momentum they're trying to capitalize on. The question isn't whether players deserve to be paid well. The question is whether the business can sustain the payments being demanded. And after 28 years of losses, the answer to that question should be obvious. So, what happens Monday? Do cooler heads prevail? Does someone in that room explain the difference between revenue and profit? Between NBA leverage and WNBA leverage? Between what players want and what the business can actually support? Or does Natasha Cloud's aggressive stance dominate the conversation, leading to a standoff that benefits no one and potentially damages women's professional basketball for years to come? Because one good attendance night in Philadelphia doesn't change 28 years of financial history. And it definitely doesn't give players the leverage to make ultimatums to owners who've been subsidizing their salaries for decades. If you want to stay ahead of what happens next, if you want the real analysis when this meeting concludes on Monday, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. We'll be breaking down exactly what gets decided, what it means for Season 30, and whether this momentum continues or collapses under the weight of unrealistic demands. Monday's meeting will reveal everything: the business reality versus the performance, the actual leverage versus the perceived power, and whether the WNBA's 30th season starts on time or whether we're headed for a confrontation that nobody wins. We'll be watching closely. Stay tuned.